They served her in silence, so she served them an unforgettable lesson. In the opulent foyer of Le Château Noir, Crystal Donovan's steps clicked against marble floors, her designer heels echoing authority. Her platinum membership card gleamed as she presented it to the maitre d', expecting the customary bow and flourish. Instead, his gaze slid past her credentials, VIP designation, executive crest, all ignored, and he offered only a curt nod toward a dim corner. No apology. No explanation. In that heartbeat, the hush of hushed whispers rang with a deeper insult, a black woman billionaire CEO of Vanguard Hospitality reduced to invisible service. But Crystal's stare burned brighter than the crystal chandeliers overhead. If you believe dignity demands justice, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell us. What would you do if they dared to erase you? Crystal watched the maitre d' lower his head as though performing an empty ritual. The velvet rope that separated the lounge from ordinary patrons seemed to throb like a pulse mocking her. She took a slow breath, her chest rising beneath the tailored ivory jacket that had sealed multi-million-dollar deals across 5 continents. The restaurant's ambient harp notes warped into a mocking echo, underscoring the moment's absurdity. She could feel every eye in the room flick to her, a ripple of recognition mixed with confusion. Regulars sipped from crystal flutes, startled by the spectacle. The head sommelier paused mid-pour, glass in hand, catching her reflection in the liquid swirl. Yet the maitre d's impassive turn made it clear none would intervene. For a moment, Crystal considered retreat, excuse herself, leave with perfect composure, and wait for her private dessert tasting later that evening. But she refused to let this slight stand. She had built Vanguard Hospitality from a scrappy startup into a billion-dollar empire. She'd orchestrated gala banquets for heads of state and revolutionized event catering with eco-conscious kitchens. And now at the threshold of a mere lounge, she would not be denied. She extended her hand again, this time unclenching a slim leather portfolio. "Please," she said, voice steady yet carrying steel. "Show me the written policy that relegates a platinum member to your service shadows." Her statement cut through the tension like a chef's knife through risotto. The maitre d's posture wavered for the first time. He swallowed, glancing down at the polished counter as though his scripts had vanished. Crystal allowed the silence to expand, a charged void demanding resolution. A photographer snapping candid shots from the corner lifted an eyebrow, sensing the narrative crystallize before his lens. At that precise moment, Crystal's assistant, standing discreetly by the wine shelves, sent a silent thumbs up, the signal that Vanguard's crisis team was on standby. The maitre d's mask of composure cracked ever so slightly. "Ma'am," he stammered, voice low, "I'm simply following directives from upstairs." "Which directive?" Crystal asked, her tone still calm, but her eyes narrowed. "A directive that overrides the $200,000 I've spent on your seasonal menus, that dismisses the countless events I've hosted under your roof." Each phrase landed with measured precision. The maitre d' cleared his throat, scanning the room for reinforcement. A waiter hovered nearby tray, balanced, waiting for orders that would never come for her. Crystal could almost taste the coppery tang of indignation rising in her throat, but she held it in check, channeling it into quiet resolve. A soft ping sounded from her earpiece, her PR lead confirming that the live stream setup was online and capturing every frame. Nearby, a business journalist peeked over her laptop, fingers poised for a tweet. Crystal nodded slightly. The lenses were hers to command. She took one step forward, her silhouette framed by the towering columns. "I want your manager," she said, voice resonant, "because if your policy contradicts your practice, I need to see the authorizing memo. And ideally, an apology." She paused, letting the words settle before she delivered the coup de grace. "Or I'll buy out your entire lounge and rewrite your menu to reflect genuine respect." The hush deepened. The maitre d' fumbled for his phone, clattering against the marble. The head chef, slipping past a back door, paused mid-stride, catching the ripple of change in the air. After 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes, the maitre d' cleared his throat again. "Very well, ma'am," he muttered. "Please wait here." With that, he vanished behind a velvet drape into the servants' corridor. Crystal exhaled, her posture relaxing fractionally. She glanced at her assistant, whose smile was a promise of support. The diners resumed their sips, some with renewed curiosity, others with grudging admiration. Moments later, the French-accented voice of Le Château Noir's general manager filled the air. He approached with measured steps, clipboard in hand, his uniform impeccable, but his expression unsettled. "Miss Donovan," he began, "I apologize for the misunderstanding. It seems there was a scheduling error with today's VIP rotation." Crystal studied him with courteous intensity. A simple mistake, she repeated, should not translate to a public slight. "I provided my membership credentials twice. Your staff's response was at best neglect. I expect your written apology and a clear plan to prevent this recurrence." The manager blinked, recovering his composure. He offered a crisp nod. "Of course. You will have a formal apology on Le Château Noir letterhead by this evening. Furthermore, we will institute mandatory sensitivity training for all front-of-house staff." Crystal allowed a small, satisfied smile. "Good. I accept your apology in advance." She turned to ascend the steps into the velvet-lined lounge, each footfall reclaiming the dignity so nearly stripped away. Behind her, the maitre d' re-emerged, offering a curt bow. Crystal paused, glancing back. Remember, she called voice-carrying service a courtesy reserved for those who respect it. Then she swept past into the lounge's warm glow, her presence a testament that respect once withheld could be restored with decisive grace. As the lush music resumed, Crystal Donovan's story was already unfolding on social feeds and news alerts. A powerful CEO turned momentary humiliation into immediate policy change. And the legend of Le Château Noir's silent serving would be retold as a lesson: dignity denied can and will be demanded back. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the restaurant's tall, arched, stained glass windows, splashing shards of ruby emerald and amber across the polished oak floors. The colors danced at Crystal Donovan's footsteps like living art, tracing her path toward the grand entrance of Le Château Noir. Gentle strains of a classical piano ribboned through the lofty space, underscoring the elegance that hung in the air like fine perfume. Patrons clad in evening attire murmured softly behind linen napkins, their conversations pausing as Crystal's tailored ivory suit made its way past valet attendants. The sharp cut of her trousers and the precise curve of her lapels spoke of boardrooms and briefing tables of a woman who had turned a family startup into Vanguard Hospitality, a billion-dollar catering powerhouse with a reputation for impeccable taste and unerring standards. As she moved forward, the marble fountain at the room's center, its sculpted cherubs frozen mid-pour, caught the light in crystalline drops. The trickle of water beneath her heels felt like a heartbeat, steady and unhurried. Crystal's designer tote rested lightly on her shoulder, its soft leather cradling essentials, her phone, her membership credentials, and the discreet earpiece she used to stay connected to her executive team. A pair of valets straightened their caps, murmuring her name with deference, and two sommeliers polishing crystal wine glasses at a side table exchanged a glance of surprised recognition. Even the maitre d', hovering near the entrance, had offered her a respectful nod earlier, until in one cold motion he turned away, gesturing her to a small table tucked into the far corner. The dent in the illusion was immediate. The velvet ropes parted not for a parade of honors, but to relegate her to obscurity. Crystal paused, mid-step, the color from the stained glass reflecting on her flawlessly made-up cheek. She took in the sight of the plush seating meant for the evening's most distinguished guests. Dinner jackets, silk scarves, and the gentle tap of heels on polished floors waiting in vain for her arrival. Her VIP membership card, embossed in gold foil, glinted from her outstretched hand. In another moment, she might have stepped forward and smiled graciously at the friendly maitre d', but his stone-faced dismissal refracted the light in her world, sending sharp shards of indignation through her calm. She inhaled the scent of truffle oil and rare vintages drifting toward her as though beckoning her back into the warmth she momentarily found denied. The stained glass panels overhead faded into a blur as her attention shifted to the mumbled whispers at nearby tables. "Isn't that the catering tycoon?" someone wondered. "Why is she not seated with the rest of the elite?" The questions buzzed around her like flies, their curiosity tinged with unease. A waiter paused, laden with a tray of amuse-bouche, tiny sculptures of foie gras and micro-herb garnishes, his poised posture cracking under the uncertainty of serving a guest banished by protocol. In that suspended moment, the restaurant's grand piano fell silent. The chandeliers overhead seemed to hold their breath. Crystal felt the surge of history's weight, centuries of social rituals, coded entrances, and hidden barriers. Yet she also felt the pulse of her own achievements, the contracts negotiated with heads of state, the banquets executed for royalty, the countless lives fed and lauded under her careful stewardship. She had navigated far more formidable halls than this one. She had taught diplomats how to yield to her authority in pointed boardrooms. Now this velvet rope and a curt gesture challenged everything she stood for. Her jaw moved ever so slightly. Every brush of her coat's ivory lapel reminded her of the power she wielded not only as CEO of a hospitality empire, but as a black woman whose very presence in these vaulted rooms carried the weight of possibility. She gathered herself, eyes steadying on the back of the maitre d's crisp tailcoat as though assessing the metal of steel. The faint trill of the restaurant's piano resumed its melody, cautious, like a heartbeat that dares to begin again. Without a word, Crystal pivoted the soft whisper of her tote against her side, a quiet declaration of intent. The valets straightened, unsure whether to intervene. The urgent hush among sommeliers and the rippling hush among diners signaled that the restaurant's theatrical reverie had been disrupted and a new performance was about to begin. Crystal's assistant, discreetly standing by a pillar, offered a subtle nod, an acknowledgement that the coup de grace would unfold with precision. In the dim corner where she was meant to sit, the tablecloth's hem fluttered like a captive flag. Crystal fixed her gaze on it, then turned slowly and retraced her steps toward the entrance. The stained glass windows watched her depart, their colors dimming in sympathy. As she reached the vestibule, the automatic doors whooshed open, their hiss swallowed by the sudden hush. The maitre d' apron crisp stood motionless. Crystal paused a final time, her profile framed by the fading glow of dusk outside. In her poised silhouette, the restaurant saw not a defeated woman, but a force poised to reclaim her dignity. With one last glance at the silent marble foyer, Crystal Donovan stepped back into the world beyond Le Château Noir's thresholds. Her departure, an unspoken promise that the next chapter would not unfold here, but on terms she would set. The stage was not merely set, it was hers to rewrite. Crystal Donovan paused beneath the soft glow of the chandelier, the crystalline prisms refracting light onto the polished wood floor like silent witnesses to an unfolding injustice. She reached into her designer clutch with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention, retrieved her embossed platinum reservation card, its gold foil gleaming under the restaurant's warm lighting, and extended it toward the maitre d'. This card was more than a token. It represented her unwavering loyalty to Le Château Noir, the venue that had hosted countless Vanguard Hospitality events, each one raising the bar for elegance and excellence. The card was her passport to every corner of the establishment, the secret wine cellar, the private chef's tasting room, and of course the coveted central table that framed the grand fountain. Tonight, however, it betrayed her. The maitre d', a man whose uniform was as immaculately tailored as the suits adorning the ambassadors and financiers around them, took the card without looking her in the eye. His fingers brushed the embossed letters, but his expression remained as still as marble. In the hushed hush of the foyer, where every footstep and hush of a skirt carried weight, his words fell like a guillotine's blade. "Your party's been moved." Crystal's breath caught. "Moved," she echoed, voice soft but carrying a steel core. The maitre d's gaze remained fixed forward, as though he might see something in the distance, more compelling than the CEO of a billion-dollar catering empire. "I'm afraid your table is no longer available." He continued, his tone neutral. No trace of apology. No hint of explanation. Around her, the restaurant's patrons paused mid-sip. A senator draped in silk paused, silver goblet suspended at his lips. A table of visiting dignitaries exchanged confused glances over their menus. Servers balanced on steel-tipped heels halted in their glide across the marble floor. The ambient piano music, meant to convey refinement and ease, stuttered into silence for a moment, as though the keys themselves had been silenced by protocol. Crystal's hand, still outstretched, held the card in midair. Diamond drop earrings caught the light-tracing arcs of shimmering color across her cheeks. She could feel the cool flash of humiliation ripple across her chest. The central table, once her rightful place, sat just to her right, its white linen gleaming empty against the grand fountain backdrop. A mere footstep would have placed her at the heart of the room where chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen raindrops and the velvet curtains framed an oil painting of the restaurant's founder. Instead, she was consigned to a dark corner and unspoken exile. Her pulse thrummed, each beat a low drum of indignation. As CEO of Vanguard Hospitality, she had orchestrated galas where heads of state toasted under seraphic arches, and red carpet premieres stopped newspapers in their tracks. Yet here in this very temple of taste, she was reduced to an anomaly, an exception that protocol refused to acknowledge. The maitre d' voice flat repeated, "Your table has been reassigned to accommodate a private party." He still would not look at her as though his eyes might betray a flicker of guilt. Crystal allowed herself a measured breath. The taste of crushed lavender from the lounge's signature cocktail mingled with the sharp tang of her own resolve. She slipped the card back into her clutch with a single fluid motion, the card's gold letters disappearing into the soft lining like a promise swallowed by shadow. The maitre d' offered no further guidance, no suggestion of where she might dine, no offer of a glass of champagne to apologize for the inconvenience. His duty done, he turned away his back as unwavering as the walls of a fortress. Glass doors whispered open behind her as servers continued their silent ballet, the clatter of china and murmur of conversation resuming. Yet a palpable tension hung in the air, like the moment before an aria's climactic note. Crystal surveyed the room with a calm that bordered on otherworldly. She noted the micro-expressions, the tightened lips of the sommelier, who glimpsed her plight, the flicker of discomfort in the ambassador's eyes, the way the visiting financier leaned forward, as though to intercept news of the affront. Each subtle reaction built the architecture of outrage that would soon become her platform. No one approached her. No Confederate stepped forward to offer solace. In this world of curated perfection, she stood alone, the only woman in the room forced to navigate the heavy weight of an unspoken slight. Yet within her chest, a spark ignited an ember of righteous indignation that refused to be smothered by the maitre d's cold formality. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, the living embodiment of dignity unshaken. In the hush, her voice was soft, but carried across the room like the toll of a bell. "I will wait here," she announced, the words crystal clear. "I'm sure you'll want to resolve this oversight." Her declaration sent a ripple through the elegant silence. Servers paused mid-step, wine glasses left brimming, guests exchanged astonished glances. The maitre d', still facing away, summoned a young assistant who approached with deference tempered by uncertainty. Crystal observed their exchange from the corner of her eye, the assistant's tentative footsteps, the crackle of his radio, the silent message relayed from his set. Crystal counted the seconds, each one a heartbeat hammered by the music of her indignation. Minutes passed, each stretching like an eternity beneath the vaulted ceilings. The piano resumed its delicate melody, but now its notes felt like a challenge rather than a comfort. Crystal's unwavering posture spoke volumes. She would not be moved. The empty table sat at the room's center, a vacant throne that mirrored her own exclusion. And yet in that void lay opportunity, a chance to rewrite the script of entitlement. She unfurled the earpiece from her ear, the faint click of detachment signaling a shift from silent spectator to active architect of justice. Her assistant emerged, offering a discreet nod. A message blinked on Crystal's phone. "Activate code Sable. Priority 1. The name coined by her executive team was as sharp and unyielding as obsidian, a directive to elevate any slight to corporate action. She tapped the screen, eyes never leaving the maitre d's retreating form. At that precise moment, the restaurant's projection screens used earlier to display the evening's special amuse-bouche flickered to life. An official statement from Vanguard Hospitality's executive office swirled onto the screens. Le Château Noir acknowledges a VIP seating error. Immediate corrective measures are underway. We apologize for any oversight. The words glowed in stark white against a deep charcoal background, impossible to ignore. A collective breath swept through the room. Conversations stuttered. Forks paused midway to mouths. The maitre d' froze in his place, the message captured as much by his reflection in the polished marble as by the stunned diners who watched. Crystal allowed herself a hint of a smile, a small, measured signature of satisfaction. Nothing had been lost in translation. The world now knew she refused to be silenced. True to form, the restaurant's director emerged, silken hair pinned back, evening gown trailing like liquid moonlight through the crowd. Her expression flickered between contrition and apprehension as she approached Crystal. The director's voice, when it came, was a subdued echo of the maitre d's' previous rigidity. "Miss Donovan, I deeply apologize for this oversight. Your original table is now ready." Crystal listened, her gaze steady, before she replied with the quiet authority of someone who never begs. "Thank you," she said, voice cool. "But I trust you understand that an apology alone is insufficient. I will expect a written commitment to improved policies and staff training to ensure no guest, especially a valued partner, ever endures this again." The director nodded, a tremor in her composure suggesting both relief and the weight of an unanticipated institution-wide overhaul. Around them, the buzz of the dining room shifted. This was no longer merely a luxurious dinner service, but a turning point in a larger narrative of respect and inclusion. Crystal closed the chapter with a final glance at the vacated central table, where once she had been denied, now she would dine, and under new terms shaped by her insistence on dignity. With poise unshaken, she stepped past the maitre d' and into the light, reclaiming her place, not just at a table, but at the head of the conversation on justice within these gilded walls. Crystal Donovan stood a breath away from the entrance's carved mahogany doors, its gilt accents gleaming like silent sentinels. In that moment, the grand banquet hall beyond, where she had planned to celebrate Vanguard Hospitality's landmark merger, felt no different from a gilded prison. Her finely tuned senses surged to life, the distant clink of sterling silver cutlery, the warm glow of candles dancing across vaulted ceilings, the hushed hum of conversation punctuated by delicate laughter. Yet each sensory detail only deepened the sting of her displacement. Her reflection shimmered in the ornate mirror behind her hair, swept into an impeccable chignon pearl, earrings brushing her neck-tailored ivory suit sculpted to perfection. It was the visage of a leader at the pinnacle of her power, a woman whose strategic acumen had built an empire from scratch. Still, in that reflection, she saw not triumph, but erasure. The quiet disbelief in the maitre d's eyes had reduced her to a mere afterthought, a protocol error to be corrected with perfunctory words. The indignity crackled beneath her calm exterior, igniting a storm she refused to let stray beyond the fortress of her self-control. Memory after memory surged forward, each a testament to her authority. She recalled the boardroom last quarter when she had faced down the industry's most formidable CEOs, steering negotiations that ended in seven-figure gains for her investors and transformative partnerships for underrepresented communities. She saw herself at the UN Circular Dais, articulating a plan for sustainable food distribution that shifted the conversation on global equity. She remembered the hush of awe as she unveiled her latest flagship project, a zero-emissions catering fleet that had drawn gasps of admiration for its blend of luxury and responsibility. Yet here and now, an attendance clipped, "Your party's been moved," had struck like a gauntlet. Protocol had been weaponized against her, the most radical prejudice masked as administrative necessity. The concept wound tighter around her, its coils squeezing beneath her ribs. In this place of opulence, prejudice had found safe harbor. A tremor of indignation shot through her. Her pulse beat like a drum, steady at first, then accelerating into a thunderous cadence. She could feel the heat at the nape of her neck, the surge of adrenaline that sharpened her focus into a blade. Every instinct, honed by crisis management from conflict zones to corporate crises, now converged on one question: how had she been denied not only her seat at a table, but the basic acknowledgement of her humanity? Behind her, the grand doors remained closed. Beyond them, an audience of the city's elite awaited her arrival. Philanthropists, dignitaries, high-net-worth patrons who considered Vanguard Hospitality's events the epitome of sophistication. They would soon dine under chandeliers she had helped design, savor dishes she had conceptualized. And yet here she was, an honored guest made to linger in the wings. Crystal released a slow breath, exhaling the tension through pursed lips. The polished marble floor underfoot seemed to reflect her resolve. Every step she chose to take from this corner would reverberate far beyond these walls. She closed her eyes momentarily, centering herself in the vast reservoir of her own resilience. This was not a moment for reaction, but for intention. She felt the electric hum of the restaurant's hidden sound system, its ambient music now a challenge. The soft jazz that had once lulled patrons now clashed with her rising determination. In one swift decision, she resolved to reclaim not only her place at the table, but the dignity that protocol had attempted to strip away. Her fingers brushed the discreet earpiece hidden beneath her collar, her lifeline to the Vanguard Executive Command Center. With a subtle motion, she disconnected it, severing the final tether to the corporate war room. Here, in this crucible of high society, she would act on her own authority. Crystal stepped back from the mirror, letting the dual image of herself linger for a heartbeat. CEO and slighted guest entangled in a single silhouette. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and withdrew her phone, sleek, silent, and laden with purpose. With practiced precision, she tapped a message to her Chief of Staff, Code Obsidian, Command Initiative. Then she sent another to the restaurant's director. Please stand by for corporate communication. As the messages flew into the ether, Crystal felt the storm within coalesce into action. The subdued hum of the restaurant's lighting shifted the air conditioning, seeming to pulse in time with her resolve. Patrons glanced toward her again, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others exchanged speculative whispers. In that charged silence, she allowed her ambition to illuminate the path forward. She would not simply accept an apology or a token correction. She would transform this slight into systemic change, rewriting the script so that no other individual, no matter their stature, could be marginalized under the veneer of protocol. The storm within her had settled into a purposeful calm. Crystal Donovan adjusted her posture, squared her shoulders, and lifted her gaze to the closed doors. They might have barred her advance for now, but they would not withstand the force she was about to wield. With the poise of an empress entering her throne room, she prepared to call down the full might of her corporate empire, and the world would witness how dignity once denied could be reclaimed in a single decisive moment. The dining room's ambient violin swelled into a sinister overture, its lilting notes twisting into a melancholy swirl that echoed through the vaulted ceilings of Le Château Noir. Crystal Donovan sat just beyond the threshold of the room's grand center, her senses sharpened by every flicker of movement around her. Candlelight danced on polished silver candelabras, and the faint scent of truffle oil and charred rosemary wove around her like a silken net. For most, this would have been a setting of unparalleled elegance. For Crystal, it was the stage for an unspoken drama of bias and exclusion. She wore her tailored ivory suit like armor, its crisp lines a testament to the precision with which she commanded boardrooms and negotiations. Her diamond cufflinks caught the light when she shifted in her seat, a quiet reminder that she was not just any guest, but the very architect of an empire worth billions. In her lap sat her purse, a sleek, structured statement of authority, and on the table lay the embossed reservation card she had presented moments ago, now a silent witness to the slight that had sent a ripple of indignation through her. Crystal's eyes followed the head chef as he glided past her table clad in a pristine white jacket and a tall toque, his gaze fixed resolutely on the next station. No nod, no glance, no acknowledgement of her presence. He moved as though she did not exist, an interloper in a room where her name was whispered with reverence beyond these walls. The assistant sommelier sighed at the cool indifference, and even the maitre d', whose discreet dismissal had redirected her to an out-of-the-way alcove, paused at a waiter's side, exchanging furtive glances that Crystal could almost read like Braille. Across the room, a cluster of well-heeled diners chatted without noticing how the room's warmth seemed to shrink around Crystal's table. The velvet draperies and the gilded Baroque moldings exuded opulence, yet Crystal felt the chill of marginalization deepen with each passing second. In this place built on rituals of hospitality, the most basic courtesies had been withheld from her. She listened as forks clinked against porcelain plates, and the low murmur of appreciation rose when an oyster platter was set before a nearby guest. The silver-tongued voice of a visiting diplomat chortled at some private joke. All these sounds, once symphonies of refinement, now underscored her isolation. When a passing server glanced her way, he hurried on, eyes averted, afraid perhaps of drawing attention or receiving the silent rebuke of a manager. Crystal's presence should have commanded bows and acknowledgments. Instead, it evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Under the table, her fingers fidgeted, a rare crack in her poised demeanor. She could feel the underlying current of prejudice rippling through the room, an undercurrent as potent and noxious as spilled sauce. This was not merely a matter of seating. It was a declaration that her identity, black female, and at the pinnacle of corporate success, disqualified her from unblemished respect in a place where every other factor of status had been meticulously curated. Her pulse throbbed, each beat a drum summoning her to action. Memories of every negotiation where she had wielded her authority flashed behind her eyelids. The boardroom in London where she had secured a vital partnership. The crisis response table in Geneva where her voice had carried hope for refugees. The red carpet unveiling of her company's first eco-friendly gala. In all of those moments, her competence and dignity had been unassailable. Here in this hallowed sanctuary of haute cuisine, something as banal as unspoken bias threatened to corrode the foundation of her self-worth. She inhaled slowly, tasting the subtle smokiness of roasted fig and the distant sparkle of champagne. These flavors intended to delight, now tasted of irony. A hush fell over the table beside her whenever the server paused for instruction. Then the hush shifted away as though her table were a ghostly afterthought. Crystal allowed herself a brief tightening of her jaw, feeling the swell of righteous fury that many might call anger. But she had long ago learned that true power lay in measured responses and channeling indignation into decisive strategy rather than letting it become uncontrolled rage. Her eyes rose to the crystal chandelier overhead, its prisms refracting light into 1,000 dancing fragments. The chandelier itself seemed witness to every triumph and slight, every turning point in the lives of the powerful who walked these halls. And in that moment, Crystal saw a reflection not only of herself, but of all those whose dignity had been undermined by silent prejudice. She would not be erased into the periphery of this room. She would stand at its very heart. Silently, she retrieved her phone from her purse and tapped her screen. A discreet message to her chief of staff, stand by for protocol midnight. Another to her general counsel, prepare corporate notice, potential contract revocation. As each message sped into the digital ether, the drumbeat of her resolve matched the crescendo of that violin. Now a battle anthem, rather than a lament. The head chef's back receded down the corridor, the hiss of the swinging door marking his departure. But the room's energy shifted as though a storm had gathered behind the facade of civility. Crystal sat up straighter, folding her hands in her lap, exuding the kind of confidence that can arrest attention without a word. Nearby guests paused mid-sip, glancing her way with the faintest glimmer of curiosity. Servers halted in their tracks, forks suspended above plates of caviar. The hush rippled outward, and suddenly the restaurant's ambient soundtrack felt off-key, as though missing its principal instrument. The maitre d', once her dismissive gatekeeper, caught her eye from across the room. His gaze faltered, pupils widening in recognition of the tide that was turning. A manager emerged from the staff-only passage, clipboard in hand, hesitating as he surveyed the room. Crystal met his gaze steadily, noting the deflation of his posture as he realized this was no longer a routine problem to be diffused quietly, but a corporate affront demanding corporate reckoning. In that electric moment, Crystal pushed back from the table. The tiles beneath her shoes clicked, each step a measured proclamation. She raised her chin higher as though drawing strength from the marble pillars surrounding her. And as the hushed whispers grew into a chorus, questions, murmurs stifled phone cameras. The stage was set for her next move. No longer simply a displaced diner, Crystal Donovan had reclaimed the room. The silent bias that had attempted to sideline her would soon be met with action as precise as any dish presented in this hall. In the rising tension amid the swirling candlelight and the echo of unspoken slights, she embodied a truth older than protocol dignity once denied calls out for justice. And Crystal's justice would be swift, unyielding, and unforgettable. The ambient glow of the restaurant's low-hung chandeliers cast a warm amber light across the polished oak table where Crystal Donovan sat. Every detail of Le Château Noir's interior seemed designed to evoke old-world grandeur, hand-painted murals of pastoral scenes, tufted leather banquettes, and glimmering cut crystal glasses that refracted candlelight into fractals on the walls. Yet beneath this refined veneer lay an undercurrent of disdain, a palpable tension that had been building since Crystal's arrival. Now it came to a head. With deliberate calm, Crystal reached for her designer gloves, a supple ebony leather pair embroidered with tiny silver accents that caught the light as she peeled them away one finger at a time. As she laid them aside on the table, the gesture felt almost symbolic. She was removing the trappings of polite society in preparation for the confrontation she intended to bring. Every movement was precise, measured, betraying none of the storm that hummed beneath her composed exterior. She rose from her seat, her tailored ivory suit moving fluidly around her frame, and spoke the maitre d' name with surgical clarity. Monsieur Duval. He looked up, his expression a flicker of surprise quickly masked by professional reserve. The maitre d' was a tall, slender man in a perfectly pressed tuxedo, his hair slicked back with such precision that not a strand escaped its place. He bowed his head slightly, as though steeling himself for another rehearsed apology. But nothing in his practiced demeanor prepared him for the unwavering intensity of Crystal's gaze. She took a step forward, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, the sound cutting through the hushed din of the dining room like a metronome marking the climax of an operatic crescendo. Patrons and staff alike sensed the shift. Forks paused midair, the waiter carrying a tray of amuse-bouches froze, and the violin ensemble in the corner let a high note linger in the air, unknowing but in perfect accompaniment to the drama unfolding. "Show me the policy barring my reservation," Crystal said, her voice low and controlled, each syllable pronounced with deliberate authority. Yet beneath that veneer lay a blade of steel, sharp enough to slice through the hollow politeness that had attempted to relegate her to a shadowed corner of the room. Monsieur Duval's eyes flickered, betraying a momentary lapse of confidence. He opened his mouth only to draw a breath and recite a line he had clearly been taught. "Madame, I truly regret the inconvenience, but tonight's event is fully private. Only those listed on the official guest roster may be accommodated. I assure you this decision comes at the highest level." He offered a clipped bow as though that mechanical courtesy might shield him from further scrutiny. Crystal held his gaze unblinking. She could see the faint tremor in his hands, the only sign that his practiced facade was cracking. "A private event," she repeated as though tasting the words for the first time. "And yet, I have an invitation signed by your own director confirming my attendance at Le Château Noir's black and gold gala this evening. I possess the original parchment," she added, her tone drawing back the voice of the powerful negotiator. "She was complete with the embossed crest and your signature, monsieur." She leaned forward, extending a slender hand that held the illuminated invitation as though it were a sword of truth. "Please point me to the clause that nullifies this document." He glanced at the paper, his perfect posture wavering as he read the raised ink. Duval's lips parted, his eyes darting back to the script. Then, with a forced composure, he replied, "Regrettably, our policies allow for capacity adjustments at any time." The gala's guest list was amended due to security concerns. His voice qualified security concerns, as though packing them with enough weight could camouflage the prejudice underlying this chain of events. Crystal's eyes narrowed only slightly, as though she were both granting him the courtesy of listening and simultaneously weighing the hypocrisy in his words. "Capacity adjustments," she said quietly. "That security concerns would exclude a CEO whose firm provides critical contingency support to your most high-profile clients." "How curious. After all, my company's gourmet divisions cater to your sister establishment, Café des Étoiles. I believe you will find that under our contract, any capacity modifications must be communicated in writing at least 24 hours in advance." Duval's face paled, the blood draining from his cheeks. He swallowed, his throat bobbing as though trying to catch a whispered apology that refused to materialize. I'm afraid these directives came just this afternoon. Security assessments deemed an increase in private staff necessary. I have no authority to override them." Crystal allowed a ghost of a smile to crease her lips, a small knowing curve that rendered every word she spoke afterward all the more potent. "No authority to override them." She inhaled, letting the silence stretch until the room's soundtrack returned with hesitant forks and cautious whispers. "Then bring me the person who does hold that authority. The individual who ordered this capricious exclusion. I wish to speak with them." Duval's shoulders sagged. The maitre d' glanced at the servers lining the perimeter, their faces masked with polite ignorance. He reached for the intercom button on his lapel fingers, shaking ever so slightly. "Please inform Madame Donovan's party that the operations director will see her momentarily." As the corridor doors parted, revealing a soft glow of recessed lighting, Crystal reclaimed her seat with deliberate grace. She replaced her gloves, easing each finger back into the supple leather, the silent assertion that nothing would uncurl in defeat. Around her, patrons and staff alike watched with bated breath. Even the violinist's bow hovered above the strings, an unintentional homage to the theatrical silence she had commanded. The operations director arrived, a heavy-set woman in a midnight blue suit, her demeanor professional, yet strained. As she approached, she cleared her throat and said, "Madam Donovan, I apologize for the misunderstanding." Her voice was smoother than Duval's, but no less hollow. "I am Elaine Marchand, Director of Operations. It appears there was an error in tonight's seating assignments." Crystal rose, folding her gloves and placing them inside her clutch. "An error of protocol," she said, "or an error of judgment? I'd like to know which, so I can correct it at its source." She held Marchand's gaze, the weight of thousands of boardroom discussions and months of careful contract negotiations anchoring her final words. "Because if there is one thing Vanguard Hospitality cannot abide, it's the degradation of our corporate dignity, especially under the guise of policy. Shall we review the seating guidelines together?" Marchand opened her mouth, then closed it again, as though trying to formulate both apology and remedy in a single breath. Crystal pressed on. "I trust that Le Château Noir values its patrons equally. I look forward to the policy document signed and dated reflecting tonight's correction. Until then, please inform your staff that my party remains in place and no further action shall be taken to exclude me or my guests." The director exhaled, a soft tremor in her shoulders. "Of course, Madame Donovan. Right away." She turned on her heel and disappeared back through the corridor doors, leaving Duval to slump in his role as perimeter guard once more. Crystal smoothed the front of her suit, settling back into her chair, as though the moment had been planned precisely to unfold in this way. Her party two industry colleagues, clad in discreet business attire, looked at her with a mixture of awe and relief. Crystal offered a gentle nod, indicating they should remain poised. Around them, the restaurant's refined hum resumed, servers moving with renewed purpose, diners leaning in as though the table's center had been rewired by her quiet authority. Moments later, Marchand returned with a sheaf of papers bearing the restaurant's official seal. She laid them on the table with trembling hands. Crystal picked up the top page, scanned the text, and looked back up, her calm unbroken. "Thank you," she said, voice as smooth as the finest vintage. "I trust these amendments will be implemented without exception." As Marchand nodded vigorously, Crystal's colleagues reached for their menus, resuming their poised conversation. Crystal allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, an internal exhale, marking the success of this composed confrontation. Underneath marble arches and shining crystal, she had reclaimed her dignity, exposed prejudice, masquerading as protocol, and set the stage for the justice that would follow. In that hush of validation, her presence radiated around the room. The maitre d' stepped forward to offer water, his earlier frost replaced by a careful warmth. The head chef, a gray-haired man whose reputation for culinary artistry was matched only by his pride, peeked from the kitchen door eyes, reflecting a new respect. Le Château Noir's ambient melody shifted, the violin's bow drawing a triumphant high note, as though this symphony had found its true crescendo, the elegant yet unyielding victory of a woman who refused to be sidelined in her own spotlight. 20 minutes into the unfolding drama, the hushed elegance of Le Château Noir's dining room felt charged with electric anticipation. Crystal Donovan sat at her secluded corner table, the ivory drapes behind her framing her like a portrait of unspoken power. The maitre d' hovered nearby, his earlier composure now an anxious veneer. As fork tines paused midair and the low murmur of conversation hushed to a curious whisper, Crystal's hand drifted to her purse, producing a discreet earpiece. She slipped it into her ear with the gentlest click, her composed exterior never faltering for an instant. Inside her ear, a soft tone confirmed the connection. COO. She whispered the word itself, resonating with authority. Activate event takeover protocol. Her voice held the calm certainty of a commander issuing orders at 0 hour. At that very moment, half a dozen subtle flutters of movement rippled through her entourage. Her chief operating officer positioned just beyond the velvet rope tapped commands into a sleek tablet. Her general counsel straightened her jacket, ready to draft immediate contract termination notices. And her PR director, seated at the bar, signaled a discreet cluster of on-call reporters that the next chapter was about to begin. Simultaneously, another message blinked onto the maitre d's silent earpiece, and the restaurant's corporate office tablet chained to the concierge desk Explain this treatment in 10 minutes or face contract termination. The words formed on the digital feed like a judicial decree, each character ringing with the authority of her billion-dollar hospitality empire. In that instant, the dining room's polished veneer cracked to reveal the steely resolve beneath. As the broadcast of her directive swept through Le Château Noir's hidden networks, the ambient violin that had once swelled into a sinister overture now diminished to a tremulous whisper. Diners leaned forward in their chairs, wine glasses poised like upturned chalices, while servers exchanged apprehensive glances as they refilled water goblets. The gatekeepers of this gilded temple of fine dining maitre d's, chefs, sommeliers felt the gravity shift. Their carefully rehearsed scripts and silent dismissals were on the brink of being swept aside by the unstoppable momentum of corporate justice. Crystal closed her eyes for a microsecond, savoring the collective intake of breath around her. Then almost imperceptibly she exhaled the movement unseen, yet profoundly felt. She had transformed from a humiliated guest into an unwavering sovereign orchestrating a coup not of violence, but of contractual authority. The heavy oak doors leading to the private dining salon behind her remained closed, but tonight those doors would swing wide under her mandate. Across the room, the maitre d' Palancourt's hands trembled as he tapped his own earpiece, desperately seeking guidance. Instead, he received the stark ultimatum: either justify his actions to Crystal's corporate headquarters or witness the immediate severing of a contract that supplied thousands of high-end catered events each year. In a single stroke, the balance of power had inverted. The restaurant's C-suite, accustomed to festoons of accolades and seamless operations, now faced a reckoning faster than any soufflé could rise in its ovens. Crystal removed the earpiece the way one might extinguish a candle, swift, precise, final. She allowed her posture to relax only fractionally, the imperceptible shift signaling that the moment of decision had arrived. The maitre d' advanced his earlier rigidity, giving way to an unsteady deference. He swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing as he fought to find the words that could salvage the evening. "Madame Donovan," he began, voice unsteady, "We are reviewing your concerns now." His gaze flicked to the concierge's tablet, to the cluster of tablets held by managers who had assembled in hushed urgency. Crystal's COO and legal counsel stepped forward seamlessly, integrating into the conversation's periphery. It was a masterclass in coordinated pressure. She had summoned her allies, not to confront him, but to bear witness, to make palpable the corporate weight now leaning across the marble countertops. Crystal inclined her head politely, yet each movement carried the gravity of her ultimatum. "I appreciate your prompt attention," she said, voice steady as a metronome. "I will await your written explanation." She slid the invitation card, once a symbol of her planned celebration, onto the table. The card's gold-embossed crest caught the chandelier light like a warning beacon. "Please ensure your reply reaches me within 10 minutes. If not," she paused, allowing the unspoken threat to hang in the amber-lit air, "I will proceed with contract termination." He nodded rapidly, mouth opening and closing, as though the words he sought had evaporated under the pressure. Then, with the hurried professionalism of a man racing against a deadline, he reached for his tablet. His fingers flew over the screen, drafting a message that would carry the restaurant's public face into conflict with her corporate counsel. Nearby servers repositioned themselves at the periphery, minds racing through contingency plans for the abrupt fallout of a canceled catering contract. At the 10-minute mark, Crystal's COO quietly tapped her shoulder and handed her a sealed envelope bearing the restaurant's official seal. The gathered managers and maitre d' Palancourt formed a human blockade around her table, but her COO's presence ensured no one breached protocol. Crystal accepted the envelope and peeled back the flap. Inside lay 2 pages of crisp stationery, each line printed with careful legal language and signed by the restaurant's CEO himself. She scanned the text: a full apology, an acknowledgement of mishandled seating assignments, and a commitment to investigate the underlying bias that allowed her exclusion. Most importantly, the letter promised immediate revocation of the private event policy that had unjustly barred her. Crystal folded the pages and placed them on the table, her calm satisfaction echoing in the hush that followed. Then in one fluid motion, she tapped her earpiece once more. "Corporate suspend the contract termination," she said softly, her tone conveying both mercy and command. "They've complied." Her assistant transmitted the reprieve even as the dining room's atmosphere shifted from tense confrontation to cautious relief. The maitre d' bowed deeply, his earlier arrogance evaporating into genuine contrition. Crystal offered him a nod of acknowledgement, an unspoken forgiveness for the moment, but a lasting rebuke against the prejudice that had sparked the entire ordeal. In that moment, the whispered apology on paper and the subtle recalibration of protocol combined to form her ultimate victory. Beyond the glass doors, Le Château Noir's kitchen staff exhaled in unison as the simmering crisis was diffused. The head chef, caught mid-plating, an elegant amuse-bouche paused his choreography of precision and peered through the opening, a look of respect blooming on his features. Crystal's EOO slipped beside her, his expression one of quiet pride. The event takeover protocol had executed flawlessly, safeguarding the dignity of their CEO and rewriting the restaurant's standards in a single decisive move. As Crystal slid back into her seat, her ivory suit brushing the polished wood, the maitre d' approached to guide her to the table she had reserved. The velvet rope was still present, but no longer a barrier now, a ceremonial ribbon ready to be cut by the architect of its own demise. The violin's melody resumed at a softer volume, its notes now tempered by a note of triumph. Crystal's eyes met her counselor's, and their relief was palpable. In 20 minutes, she had transformed a humiliating snub into a demonstration of corporate clout and unassailable resolve. The envelope on the table wasn't just an apology, it was a testament to her capacity to harness justice with the precision of a seasoned executive. And as the valet outside whispered her new table number to poised servers, every inch of Le Château Noir acknowledged that its protocols would henceforth bear the imprint of her definitive authority. Completed the table's service. Recommenced wine glasses were refilled in synchronous elegance. Menus reopened with renewed deference. The head chef emerged to personally introduce the next course, offering not merely sustenance, but a gesture of restored respect. And Crystal, surrounded by the faint glow of candlelight and the rustle of fine linen, let the satisfaction of vindication wash over her, secure in the knowledge that dignity once stolen had been reclaimed, rewritten, and fortified in the span of 20 minutes. The mahogany-paneled entrance to Le Château Noir seemed to inhale as Crystal Donovan's general counsel Miriam Clark and PR director Antoine Dupree stepped into the hushed foyer. Their presence was almost photographic. Miriam's tailored navy suit exuded authority, while Antoine's camera bag swung lightly across his broad frame. In a single glance, Crystal acknowledged their arrival with a slight tilt of her head, an unspoken command to mobilize the next phase of her strategy. Antoine slipped behind a cluster of faux marble pillars, extracting a high-definition camera from his bag. He gave Crystal a subtle thumbs up, his practiced motion betraying years of capturing corporate narratives in real time. To the untrained eye, he was just another professional quietly at work. To Crystal and her inner circle, he was the linchpin of their public pressure campaign. Meanwhile, Miriam approached the maitre d' palanquin, her heels clicking on the inlaid floor as she intercepted him mid-bow. Her voice was low but firm. "I'm Miriam Clark, General Counsel to Vanguard Hospitality. Please direct your corporate liaison to me immediately." The maitre d's polished veneer cracked at the edges. His impeccable composure faltered under the weight of her quiet authority. In that moment, the soft violin that had underscored the tension now plunged into silence as patrons sensed the pivot. A well-heeled couple at a nearby table paused their champagne flutes, eyes flicking between the opulent surroundings and the drama unfolding at the entrance. The head chef, visible through a narrow pass in the curtain, halted, mid-step, worry creasing his brow. Even the ambient sense of truffle oil and aged wine seemed to pause on the air. Crystal rose from her table, smoothing the lapel of her ivory blazer. She took 2 deliberate steps toward the entrance, where Antoine had already begun his discreet live stream, a small red dot blinking at the corner of his viewfinder, indicating live. The event, once confined to the private sphere of Le Château Noir, was now hurtling into public view, reaching screens and news feeds long before the next course could be served. Antoine angled his camera to capture the maitre d' palanquin's flustered apology as Miriam laid out Crystal's demands, a formal explanation of the snub assurance of non-discrimination in protocol, and immediate review of the restaurant's VIP policy. His lens then shifted to Crystal herself, calm, composed, yet undeniably commanding. Viewers tuning in witnessed not a moment of petty indignation, but the enactment of corporate justice in its most cinematic form. At her side, Miriam whispered the next steps into Crystal's ear, digitally archiving every utterance, every gesture, every tear of anxiety in the maitre d's eyes. This was legal jeopardy unfolding live, and Crystal's counsel was careful to record every nuance. A soft click announced the opening of a secure legal channel. Minutes later, a preliminary contract termination notice would be en route to Le Château Noir's parent corporation. Meanwhile, Antoine's live-stream chat exploded with comments. "She's rewriting the rulebook. Go, Crystal. Never underestimate CEO power patrons." In the cafe, beyond the velvet rope peeked over their beverages drawn by the flicker of phone screens and whispered anticipation. In the lounge's gilded quiet, the buzz of incoming texts and alerts felt like a crescendo of public scrutiny. Back at the bar, Antoine pivoted his camera to catch Antoine Dupree's deft motion releasing a statement to local business journals and social media channels. Crystal Donovan's dignified confrontation at Le Château Noir highlights the urgent need for equitable treatment in all customer service settings. The PR director's words would ripple outwards, ensuring that the restaurant's next decision would be scrutinized not just by its own management, but by a wider audience invested in corporate accountability. Crystal stepped gracefully to the threshold where the maitre d' and the restaurant's regional manager now stood side by side, swallowed by the mounting drama. The regional manager attempted a conciliatory bow, but Crystal's gaze held him fast. "You have 10 minutes, she said, voice measured yet unyielding. "I await your written response. Until then, no contract shall proceed." Her general counsel signaled to Antoine to maintain the shot, ensuring that every reaction from the maitre d's pallor to the staffer's sudden rustle was captured. In those curated frames, the public would see bias confronted by resolve and corporate muscle flexed, not for profiteering, but for principle. A ripple of movement parted through the staff line. Cooks paused, servers froze mid-service. Sommeliers halted their decanting rituals. The kitchen's sizzle muted the polished silverware. Clink paused in midair. All eyes turned to the central tableau, Crystal Donovan standing barefaced in her dignity, flanked by her allies calling for justice. From somewhere in the back, a discreet ping announced the restaurant's first official response to her ultimatum. Crystal's COO, positioned off-camera to ensure neutrality, nodded once, signaling that the corporate headquarters had received her demands and was drafting a compliance document. Within moments, Miriam accepted a sealed digital packet handed by the maitre d's trembling assistant. She broke the electronic seal, scanned the contents with a practiced eye, an apology, an immediate suspension of the private event restrictions that had barred Crystal's initial reservation, and a pledge to convene an independent review board to overhaul discriminatory seating policies. Crucially, the document promised that no future guest, regardless of race status or net worth, would be relegated to the shadows without cause, and that any violation would trigger automatic contract review. Miriam closed the packet, her face a mask of resolute triumph. Crystal inclined her head in acknowledgement. The velvet rope dropped behind her as the maitre d' Palancourt stepped aside. The hush lifted, replaced by the timid hiss of resumed dining. The orchestra of Le Château Noir resuming its score under new corrective measures. Antoine captured the moment of release, Crystal's soft exhalation, the maitre d's relieved bows, the staff's discreet sighs of relief. Then, with a gesture as elegant as any ballet, Crystal returned to her original table, escorted by Miriam and Antoine. The room's atmosphere, once tense and charged with prejudice, now pulsed with a cautious respect and the afterglow of witnessed justice. As Crystal settled into her seat, the first course, an artful arrangement of heirloom tomatoes and microgreens, arrived unbidden, accompanied by a sincere apology from the head chef in person. Crystal offered him a gracious smile, signaling the restoration of mutual respect. Cameras captured the moment in panoramic sweep, the vaulting ceilings, the stained glass illumination, and above all the figure of a black CEO who had transformed indignity into systemic reform. In the space of minutes, an era of impunity had ended and a new standard had been born. Le Château Noir's protocols, once an iron gate to prejudice, were now a pliable framework subject to the demands of dignity and equitable treatment. The patrons resumed their meals with a newfound awareness behind every till, every tip, every welcoming nod lay the potential for justice or its denial. Crystal's composure never wavered. Her poise never betrayed a flicker of triumphalism. Instead, she let the room exhale its collective affirmation that even the grandest halls of exclusion could be reclaimed through calculated resolve and purposeful alliance. In the aftermath, as the doors to the private salon finally opened for her, anew Crystal's presence was not merely that of a guest, but of an architect of accountability, an exemplar of how corporate power wielded with integrity can rewrite the unspoken rules of respect. And though the candle flames flickered on the linen-draped tables, their glow now tinged with the satisfaction of redress, Crystal's silhouette remained fixed in the minds of all who had watched, a testament that when silence meets dignity, measured resolve can turn the tide even in the most august of settings. The hush in Le Château Noir deepened into a stunned silence as Crystal Donovan's words reverberated off the vaulted ceilings. Flames flickered in the wrought iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the marble floor. The restaurant's regional manager, a man whose polished composure barely concealed panic, had just witnessed a verdict no one in this hallowed dining room had anticipated. Crystal's tailored ivory blazer caught the warm glow of the chandeliers as she stood center stage, no longer merely a guest, but the architect of immediate and sweeping justice. She watched the regional manager's cheeks flush as he stepped forward, his posture stiff with unease. His lips parted as though to apologize, but the gravity of her declaration held him mute. All eyes in the room flicked between Crystal and the florid expression on the manager's face, as though time itself had paused to bear witness. "I appreciate your prompt attention to this matter," Crystal continued, voice smooth yet edged with authority. "However, respect and equity are not invitations, they are imperatives." She paused, letting the weight of her next sentence settle like sediment in the room's collective consciousness. Effective immediately, Chef Marcel's exclusive catering contract with Vanguard Hospitality is revoked. The syllables hung in the air, heavy as lead. A dozen couples frozen in mid-sip of their champagne looked down at their flutes as though uncertain how to proceed. Waiters carrying silver trays stopped in their tracks, porcelain plates trembling in their hands. In the open kitchen beyond the curtain, Chef Marcel himself, whose reputation for avant-garde cuisine had once been the draw, stood with a ladle in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. A single drop of beurre blanc splattered onto the gleaming steel countertop, a punctuation mark in the drama unfolding. Crystal's general counsel, Miriam Clark, stood at her side, discreetly capturing the regional manager's reaction on a tablet. Antoine Dupree, the PR director, adjusted his camera angle, ensuring that every fleeting expression, every flicker of shock, every shiver of revelation would be preserved for the world to see. This was more than a private reprimand, it was a public reckoning. The regional manager's throat bobbed as he summoned the words, but none came. Crystal lent him no easy exit. Her steely gaze, the same that navigated negotiations on behalf of a billion-dollar catering empire, now pierced him with the clarity of someone who would brook no equivocation. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Ms. Donovan," he stammered, voice thin. This is highly irregular. Chef Marcel's contract spans several years and involves significant commitments from both parties. I'll need to confer with corporate before acknowledging any revocation." Crystal's lips curved into a measured smile that carried neither warmth nor mockery, but the unassailable certainty of a woman in full command of her power. "Corporate has already been informed," she replied softly, yet each syllable rang like a tolling bell. "My executive team has the necessary documentation, and the termination clause you've just invoked is being executed as we speak." She lifted a single hand and tilted her wrist, revealing the tablet Miriam held, where the signed revocation notice glowed in bold digital text. "Venue contract termination, effective immediately, signed by Crystal Donovan, CEO." At that instant, Antoine's live stream chat exploded. She did it. Chef Marcel replaced corporate justice in action. Crystal's careful orchestration was now fully exposed to both the patrons in the room and the global audience watching online, a symphony of corporate accountability conducted in real time. In the dining room, the head maitre d' Palancourt cleared his throat, stepping forward with what looked like an effort to salvage decorum. Ms. Donovan, on behalf of Le Château Noir, I apologize for the misunderstanding. He began, voice measured but strained. Chef Marcel's contract has indeed been placed under review. We value our partnership with Vanguard Hospitality and hope to resolve this matter amicably. Crystal raised her hand, a graceful interrupter that carried the force of a courtroom gavel. Review is no longer sufficient, she said, voice precise. There will be no partnership until you can, without caveat, ensure that no guest will ever be relegated to a corner table again. Until then, consider us independent. A rumble of astonished murmurs coursed through the diners. The waiter who had once guided Crystal to the corner table now approached her table, a silver tray in his hand. His carefully practiced smile flickered with genuine respect as he asked, "Would you care for the menu, Ms. Donovan?" His voice bore none of the earlier condescension. Crystal inclined her head, slightly acknowledging his shift in deference. "Thank you," she replied, voice calm. "I'll have the Côte de Boeuf, but only if it's prepared by a kitchen that stands behind equitable treatment for all patrons." The waiter dipped into a deep bow. "Yes, ma'am. I'll see to it personally." He retreated and the kitchen door swung closed behind him, sealing the promise of a meal as dignified as the woman who would eat it. In the plaza of cameras and counsel, Miriam tapped a few keys on her tablet. Within seconds, a new status update lit up Antoine's streaming console. Chef Marcel's contract officially removed from Vanguard Hospitality portfolio. Request for new catering partner issued. The digital confirmation pinged in synchrony with the diner's collective heartbeat. Chef Marcel, visible through the kitchen window, paused midway through a flambé demonstration. His brow furrowed as he glimpsed his own revocation in the live stream commentary now scrolling across the restaurant's internal monitors. He licked a finger and tested the flame, his signature move, before lowering his head in quiet acknowledgement of the shift that had just occurred under his very nose. Crystal settled back into her chair, smoothing her glove-lined hands across the pristine linen. She watched the patrons' faces relax into polite conversation, the air's tension dissolving into the gentle clinking of silverware. The moment of confrontation had passed. In its wake lay a restored equilibrium, one that acknowledged dignity as non-negotiable. Antoine closed the recording with a single nod to Crystal, then switched his camera to capture the dinner's resumption. Diners, once oblivious to the drama, now offered nods of respect as they passed by her table. The head chef reappeared to recite the evening's specials, this time pausing to include a discreet acknowledgement of Vanguard Hospitality's dietary preferences, signaling a restored partnership on newly leveled ground. Outside, the evening sky had deepened to a velvet indigo, the city lights glittering like distant stars through the restaurant's windows. Crystal Donovan, CEO of Vanguard Hospitality, reclined in her seat, a look of serene satisfaction on her face. She had come expecting white glove service and had been met with silence, only to orchestrate a swift reversal that echoed far beyond the restaurant's gilded walls. As the first notes of the maitre d's apology were carried away by the soft strains of resumed violin, Crystal allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She had transformed humiliation into empowerment, turned bias into a catalyst for swift policy change, and demonstrated that when respect is denied, power can be reclaimed in the same breath. In that final tableau, Crystal Donovan seated beneath the flickering chandelier's silver service restored and the staff moving with renewed deference. The message was clear. Dignity is the currency of real power, and those who attempt to devalue it must be prepared to pay the price. The verdict had been delivered, the contract revoked, and a new standard of respect set, one sequenced to the steady cadence of Crystal's measured yet unyielding resolve. The clatter of cutlery and tinkling of crystal glasses, once the signature backdrop of Le Château Noir's refined ambiance, faded into an uncanny hush. Crystal Donovan's denunciation had silenced the room more effectively than a vault's lock. Smartphones, once hidden discreetly in laps and pockets, now rose in unison, their cameras trained on the CEO, who had just rewritten the evening's menu of power. Crystal stood beneath the grand archway of stained oak and gilded moldings, her ivory suit gleaming against the restaurant's deep mahogany tones. The maitre d', face ashen, hovered at her side, while the regional manager hovered behind him, jaw clenched in brittle regret. Washer-waiters paused mid-step, trays quivering in their hands. Even the candles on each table seemed to flicker in collective anticipation. Clearing her throat softly, Crystal allowed the tension to thicken before speaking again. This establishment has earned its reputation on exquisite cuisine and impeccable service. She began, voice steady but resonant, carrying through the vaulted dining hall like a clarion call. Yet tonight we have witnessed the very opposite of hospitality. Dignity, not decorum, must be our first course. The regional manager swallowed his throat, bobbing as he sought the words to respond. Crystal held up a single hand to forestall any interruptions. Effective immediately, Vanguard Hospitality will launch the Culinary Justice Initiative. She declared, her tone crisp as a fine linen napkin. Going forward, any partner we collaborate with must sign our Dignity Pledge, a binding agreement to treat every guest, regardless of background status or appearance, with the respect they deserve. A murmur rippled through the assembled diners as the magnitude of her pronouncement sank in. Crystal watched the maitre d's eyes flick to the staff huddled near the kitchen door, then back to her. She knew his next words would signal whether real change had taken root. He straightened, drawing up whatever dignity he had left. "Miss Donovan," he said, voice measured on behalf of Le Château Noir. "I accept these terms. We will review our partnership agreements, retrain our staff, and sign your dignity pledge by tomorrow morning." Crystal allowed a small, satisfied smile. "Thank you. I look forward to our future collaborations, ones built on respect." She paused, letting the cameras capture the moment, then turned to face the patrons who had borne witness. "I invite you all to raise a glass, not just to great cuisine, but to the principle that no one should ever dine in silence." Glasses rose in tentative toasts. Some clinked, others hovered mid-air before daring the cheers. Crystal's COO, Lydia Chen, approached with a tablet in hand and tapped to launch the pledge document, ensuring the initiative was set in motion at once. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, their live stream feeds now carrying the story of how a Black CEO had transformed indignity into empowerment. In the kitchen, Chef Marcel stood at his line, eyes fixed on the doorway. His brigade of cooks assembled behind him faces a mixture of shame and determination. Moments ago, his contract had been revoked. Now he faced the prospect of redemption under Crystal's new standards. A renewed sense of purpose flickered in his gaze as he resolved to uphold the pledge he and his team would soon sign. Back in the dining room, Crystal allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The chandeliers overhead gleamed like a constellation of watchful eyes, bearing witness to a transformation that extended beyond food. In one swift, decisive act, she had drawn a line between luxury and inclusion, made clear that in her world, dignity precedes decor. As the ambient music resumed, this time a hopeful swell rather than a sinister overture, the restaurant staff began the careful choreography of service anew. Crystal took her seat at the newly cleared table, her posture radiating calm authority. Lydia slid into the seat opposite her tablet, ready to confirm every pledge signature. From the raised platform near the entrance, Antoine Dupree captured the scene, the restored clink of cutlery, the tentative smiles of patrons rediscovered the first keystrokes of the Culinary Justice Initiative being typed into official logs. This was no mere PR stunt. It was the genesis of a new standard, one that would resonate from haute cuisine halls to the humblest counters. And as Crystal Donovan lifted her water glass in a private toast to justice, reclaimed policy, rewritten to humanity, honored the flash of cameras, and the murmur of approval coalesced into a single enduring truth that when dignity is denied, swift measured action can restore it, and in so doing, elevate us all. By evening, the ripples of Crystal Donovan's decisive stand at Le Château Noir had swelled into a tidal wave across the culinary and hospitality world. Smartphones glowed, and every hand screens flooded with post-tagged #justice served and #Vanguard. Affect each iteration amplifying the message that dignity was non-negotiable. Influencers recut clips of the moment the maitre d' yielded, setting that footage to triumphant piano chords and sharing it with captions like, "When respect is denied, action must be swift." In New York City's upscale dining districts, kitchen doors cracked open for staff huddles around tablet screens playing Crystal's words. "No guest shall be barred without written justification." Chefs paused, mid-chop servers leaned against gleaming counters, and bartenders wiped down polished wood surfaces, all absorbing the gravity of what had transpired. Headlines popped up on industry sites: CEO revokes, chef contract over snub. Defining moment for corporate accountability. How Vanderbilt's Crystal Donovan forced a policy rewrite in one lunch. Each article cited her masterclass in instant redress, lauding her ability to translate personal affront into sweeping reform. Rival restaurants and hotel chains, overhearing the chatter in foie gras tinted parlors and clinking bar carts, scrambled to reassess their own policies. In the boardroom of the city's premier boutique hotel, the Lexington House, executives gathered around a marble conference table. The general manager flicked on a projector a live feed of Crystal's announcement under the title Defining Hospitality Excellence. A murmur passed through the room as the hotel's director of guest services cleared his throat. "We must audit our VIP access procedures," he said. "If Vanguard can do this in under an hour, what are we waiting for?" Across town at the headquarters of Sovereign Catering, the CEO convened an emergency town hall for all department heads. On a giant screen, Crystal's evening interview with a business news anchor played "Respect isn't a privilege, it's a right." As she spoke, the audience of regional managers and operations leads scribbled notes, already drafting the bullet points for a new guest integrity protocol to be rolled out next week. The head of human resources shook her head in admiration, remarking to her colleague, "I've never seen a single incident trigger such immediate industry-wide change." Local media outlets amplified the story's reach. Morning radio talkers replayed Crystal's rebuke to Le Château Noir's management, punctuating their programs with commentary about the broader implications for racial equity in luxury spaces. National business journals ran op-eds dissecting the economic logic of her move. One projected that Vanguard Hospitality's brand value would surge by 7% as a result of the positive publicity, noting that in an age where consumers demand ethical leadership, Crystal Donovan's brand has just vaulted to the head of the class. Social justice advocates also co-opted the narrative. A prominent civil rights organization tweeted, "When one powerful woman reclaims her dignity, legislation falls in line." Bravo at Crystal Donovan, CEO. Community forums buzzed with discussions about everyday instances of discrimination in exclusive venues, inspiring calls for corporate ombudspersons and clearer anti-bias training. Within hours, a petition titled "Equity in Hospitality" amassed thousands of signatures urging local governments to require public reporting on complaint resolutions in high-end establishments. Meanwhile, within Vanguard Hospitality itself, the impact was palpable. Frontline staff, caterers, event planners, servers gathered around breakroom tablets to watch the evening's news coverage. Crystal's directness, her refusal to accept the status quo, filled them with pride and a renewed sense of purpose. The COO of Operations, Lydia Chen, announced a new internal loyalty program. Any employee who reported or remedied a dignity violation would receive recognition and a financial bonus. In team meetings, managers recounted Crystal's words as "gospel hospitality begins with respect." Perhaps most striking was the response from Le Château Noir's own clientele. Regular patrons, upon hearing of the incident and the swift contract revocation, wondered aloud whether their next reservations might include similar shames. Private dining clubs that had once relied on the restaurant's exclusivity started exploring new partnerships, fearful that any hint of discriminatory service could become their unmaking. In an email to stakeholders, the Chateau's owner admitted that the business had lost several key accounts in the past 24 hours, attributing the cancellations directly to our failure to uphold the standards Ms. Donovan so decisively enforced. By the next morning, the luxury dining landscape felt permanently altered. A consortium of top-tier hotels and restaurants released a joint statement. "We pledge to adopt the dignity pledge set forth by Vanguard Hospitality and to review our own codes of conduct." News outlets framed this as the Donovan Doctrine, a new paradigm in customer relations that placed human respect at the forefront of corporate policy. Training modules that once glossed over bias incidents were rewritten to begin and end with Crystal's story. Even the broader business community took note. A leading corporate governance journal published a case study on Vanguard's incident rapid response to reprimand, how Crystal Donovan turned humiliation into a policy triumph. MBA programs circulated the story among students as a blueprint for ethical leadership. And when Crystal convened her annual board meeting that afternoon, her directors greeted her with standing ovations, their admiration rooted not only in the billions her firm managed, but in the integrity with which she wielded that power. In the end, the story of Crystal Donovan's humiliation at Le Château Noir and her swift, uncompromising response echoed far beyond one gilded dining room. It became a cultural pivot point reminding every company that respect isn't merely an amenity, but an inviolable baseline. In the restaurant kitchens, the boardrooms, and the corridors of power, one resounding lesson took hold: when dignity is compromised, leadership must answer swiftly, lest every VIP-only sign hide a deeper shame. And in that recognition, the power of one courageous CEO reshaped an entire industry and redefined what true service means. As dusk settled over the city skyline, the reverberations of Crystal Donovan's showdown at Le Château Noir had transcended that single hushed dinner hall to reshape the very ethos of high-end hospitality. In the gleaming boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies and the oak-paneled conference chambers of prestigious culinary associations, her decisive act of corporate justice was recounted as both cautionary tale and rallying cry. Executives draped in bespoke suits recited the account of how within 40 minutes a slighted CEO had turned humiliation into empowerment, not with bluster or vendetta, but with the resolute assertion that respect is non-negotiable. At Vanguard Hospitality's global headquarters, the morning after Crystal's victory, a framed photograph of her standing alone in the dining room, designer gloves removed, earpiece in hand, eyes blazing, hung prominently in the executive corridor. Below it, an engraved plaque bore her closing words, "Respect is the first course and it's non-negotiable." Employees paused before the image, drawing inspiration from the distilled power of that declaration. In team huddles and one-on-one coaching sessions, managers invoked her ethos whenever service protocols were under discussion. It was no longer adequate to serve fine food and rare wines. One had to serve courtesy, dignity, and accountability with equal rigor. Across town, the American Culinary Federation convened an emergency summit to examine the Donovan Doctrine and its implications for professional standards. Chefs, restaurateurs, and hoteliers gathered under crystal chandeliers, ironically echoing Le Château Noir's own opulence, to debate new guidelines on guest treatment, inclusive service, and bias awareness training. Panelists spoke of mandatory dignity checkpoints integrated into reservation systems, real-time monitoring of guest feedback, and quarterly certifications verifying compliance with equitable service standards. Crystal herself joined via video link, her presence commanding the same respect her physical form had demanded in that fateful dining room. At the National Association of Corporate Counsel, a white paper circulated titled "Corporate Authority and Ethical Recourse Lessons" from Crystal Donovan. Attorneys analyzed the rapid contract revocation she executed, praising her seamless coordination between legal, PR, and operations teams. They held up her event takeover protocol as a paragon of precision under pressure, a blueprint for how corporate power could and should be deployed to uphold fundamental human dignity. Meanwhile, at Le Château Noir, the staff who had once offered silence had undergone an abrupt transformation. In the kitchen's stainless steel glare, Chef Marcel paced with a haggard expression, consulting the overnight email from the restaurant's ownership group. They'd withdrawn his exclusive contract and committed to a sweeping hospitality equity initiative. He was to lead bias awareness workshops for front-of-house staff, rewrite the maitre d's training manual, and personally apologize to Crystal Donovan before the restaurant reopened for service. As the first light of dawn filtered through the stained glass windows, the very place that had witnessed a bitter rebuke began prepping for a new chapter. One defined by accountability rather than arrogance. Even patrons of luxury dining found their expectations forever altered. Private clubs updated membership handbooks to include respect pledges that every member and their guests would sign, promising courteous greetings, unbiased service, and transparent explanations for any denied privileges. Business travelers, once loath to question VIP access, now scanned lounge entry policies with fresh scrutiny, assured that a single misstep could invite the kind of corporate intervention they'd just witnessed. In municipal government offices, too, conversations sparked about extending Crystal's principle beyond hospitality. City council members explored ordinances requiring public venues, libraries, community centers, theaters to adopt non-discrimination mandates for all patrons, VIP or otherwise. Civil rights advocates seized on the narrative to push for clearer anti-bias regulations in both public and private sectors, arguing that dignity-like safety demands codified safeguards. By nightfall, the global media landscape had reframed the incident as more than a personal victory, it was a societal inflection point. Headlines from London to Sydney proclaimed, "When Luxury Shames Leadership Acts and How One CEO Rewrote the Rules of Respect." Social media influencers dissected the moments leading up to Crystal's crescendo, tagging the Hashtag Vanguard effect as a benchmark for decisive, principled leadership. Yet perhaps the most resonant echo of her stand was felt back at Vanguard Hospitality's own event calendar. For every gala catered, every boardroom luncheon organized, Crystal insisted on a brief acknowledgement moment. A minute at the outset when hosts and guests affirmed the company's commitment to equitable, respectful service. It was a ritual distilled from her own experience, a proactive guarantee that no one, regardless of pedigree or portfolio, would ever be served in silence again. And so as twilight deepened overhead and the city's lights flickered to life, Crystal Donovan's legacy pulsed through every corridor of power and every dining room poised to greet its next guest. Her singular act of instant accountability became the cornerstone of a new standard, one where respect was neither bestowed as favor nor withheld as rebuke, but secured as the very first course in the grand banquet of human dignity. In every whispered recollection, every policy memo, every nod of professional deference, her final words resonated: respect is the first course, and it's non-negotiable.